In the shadow of the twin moons of Sadala, the air was thick with the acrid scent of scorched earth and the metallic tang of blood. The battlefield stretched endlessly, a grim tapestry of shattered machines and fallen warriors. General Klaus stood atop a ridge, his silhouette stark against the crimson horizon. His armor, battered and scorched, bore the scars of countless battles, each mark a testament to humanity's resilience. The Death Worlders had come without warning, descending upon Sadala like a plague. Towering, grotesque beings with obsidian skin and eyes that glowed like molten lava, they were the stuff of nightmares. Their technology was as alien as their forms, machines that defied understanding and wrought devastation with a mere whisper. Yet it was not their weapons that unnerved Klaus the most, it was their silence. They fought without war cries, without the guttural roars of rage or pain. They were a force of nature, cold and unrelenting. Humanity had been unprepared for the onslaught. The colonies on Sadala, once thriving hubs of exploration and trade, were reduced to smoldering ruins within days. The Death Worlders had no interest in negotiation, no demands or ultimatums. They sought only annihilation. But humanity was not so easily extinguished. Klaus tightened his grip on the hilt of his plasma saber, the weapon humming faintly in response. Around him, the remnants of his battalion prepared for the next wave. Men and women, their faces streaked with dirt and determination, checked their weapons and whispered hurried prayers. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But they were human, and that meant they were dangerous. A low rumble echoed across the battlefield, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Klaus raised his hand, signaling for silence. The Death Worlders were coming. He could feel it, a primal instinct honed by years of warfare. He turned to his troops, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Today, we stand on the edge of extinction," he began, his tone steady and resolute. "But we are not broken. We are not defeated. We are humanity, and we do not yield. They may have their machines, their monsters, their silence. But we have something they will never understand. We have hope. We have each other. And we have the will to fight." A cheer rose from the ranks, a defiant roar that seemed to shake the very heavens. Klaus allowed himself a brief smile. They were ready. The Death Worlders would come as they always did, with their cold efficiency and overwhelming force. But this time they would face the fury of humanity unleashed. As the first shadows of the enemy appeared on the horizon, hulking figures that seemed to drink in the light around them, Klaus raised his saber high, its blade igniting in a blaze of blue light that cut through the twilight gloom like a beacon. "For Sadala! For humanity!" he bellowed before charging down the ridge to meet the oncoming storm. The clash was immediate and brutal, a cacophony of plasma fire and unearthly shrieks as human ingenuity met alien ferocity head-on. Klaus moved like a tempest through their ranks. His saber carved arcs of searing light through obsidian flesh as if he were wielding vengeance itself. Around him, his soldiers fought with reckless abandon, each one a testament to humanity's indomitable spirit. The Death Worlders pressed forward in waves, silent but relentless. Yet for every human who fell, another stepped forward to take their place. Klaus could see it in their eyes, an unyielding determination born from desperation but tempered by hope. It wasn't just survival driving them anymore, it was defiance. Klaus knew this battle would not be won today or even tomorrow. It was a war of attrition against an enemy who seemed infinite in number and devoid of mercy. But humanity had something no other species possessed, an unshakable belief in its own survival against impossible odds. And so they fought, not just for Sadala, but for every colony lost before it, for every life snuffed out by these invaders, for every dream shattered by war. As night fell over Sadala's blood-soaked plains and stars began to pierce through its smoke-choked skies, the battle raged on beneath them, a testament to humanity's refusal to fade quietly into oblivion. For Klaus knew one thing above all else. This war would end not with surrender, but with victory, because humans didn't just fight to survive, they fought to win. The battle raged on, a maelstrom of chaos and destruction that stretched across the plains of Sadala. The Death Worlders surged forward like a tide of darkness, their towering forms blotting out the faint light of the twin moons. General Klaus, his plasma saber now sheathed, stood amidst the carnage with his eyes fixed on the horizon. His instincts told him something was wrong. The Death Worlders' advance was too coordinated, too precise. This wasn't just a mindless charge, it was a calculated assault. And then he saw them, high above the battlefield, barely visible against the smoke-choked sky. The enemy war drones hovered like vultures circling a dying beast. Sleek and angular, they moved with eerie precision, their obsidian hulls reflecting the faint glimmers of firelight below. These machines were not mere scouts. They were harbingers of death. Each one carried enough firepower to decimate entire squads in seconds. Klaus clenched his jaw. He had seen these drones before, during the initial invasion. They had rained destruction from above, targeting command posts and supply lines with ruthless efficiency. If they weren't stopped, his forces would be torn apart before they could even regroup. He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Rains, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic arm that whirred softly as he adjusted his rifle. "Rains," Klaus barked, "take command of the ground assault. Hold this line at all costs." Rains nodded without hesitation. "Understood, sir." "And you?" Klaus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the weapon slung across his back, a sleek, matte-black sniper rifle that seemed almost out of place amidst the grime and chaos of war. It was a relic from another time, a masterpiece of human engineering that Klaus had carried through countless battles. The rifle's name was etched into its barrel: Judgment. "I'm going hunting," Klaus said finally, his voice cold and resolute. Without waiting for a response, he sprinted toward a nearby ridge, a jagged outcrop of rock that offered a clear view of the battlefield below. His movements were swift and purposeful despite the weight of his armor and the chaos around him. Soldiers shouted his name as he passed, their voices filled with both respect and desperation. Klaus ignored them. His focus was absolute. Reaching the ridge, he dropped to one knee and raised Judgment to his shoulder. The rifle's advanced optics hummed softly as they powered up, overlaying his vision with a digital display that highlighted targets in vivid red. Through the scope, he could see the drones more clearly now, sleek predators gliding silently through the air like shadows given form. Klaus exhaled slowly, steadying his aim. He had been an elite sniper long before he became a general, a ghost on countless battlefields who could end lives from miles away with a single pull of the trigger. This was where he truly belonged, in the quiet focus of the hunt. The first shot was fired without hesitation. The rifle's recoil was negligible thanks to its advanced dampening systems, but its power was undeniable. A streak of blue plasma tore through the sky like a bolt of lightning, striking one of the drone's dead center. The machine exploded in a blinding flash of light and shrapnel, its remains plummeting to the ground in a fiery arc. Klaus didn't pause to admire his handiwork. He adjusted his aim and fired again. Another drone obliterated before it could react. The remaining machines began to scatter, their artificial intelligence recognizing the threat and adapting accordingly. But it didn't matter. Klaus was faster. One by one, he picked them off with surgical precision. Each shot found its mark. A fuel cell detonated here, a control module severed there, until the sky above Sadala was littered with falling wreckage. But then they adapted further. The remaining drones began deploying countermeasures, flurries of micromissiles that screamed through the air toward Klaus's position. He rolled to the side just as an explosion obliterated the rock where he had been kneeling moments before. Shards of stone rained down around him as he scrambled for cover. "Clever bastards," Klaus muttered under his breath as he reloaded Judgment. The rifle's energy core hummed ominously as it charged for another shot. He peeked out from behind cover just long enough to spot another drone lining up an attack run on his troops below. Without thinking, he fired again, the plasma bolt slicing cleanly through its propulsion system and sending it spiraling into a group of advancing Death Worlders in a fiery inferno. Klaus allowed himself a grim smile, but knew better than to celebrate prematurely. There were still too many drones left, and now they knew exactly where he was. He activated his comm link and barked into it. Rains, I've got their attention up here. Push forward while you can. Understood. Rains's voice crackled back amidst gunfire and explosions. Klaus took a deep breath and prepared for what came next. The drones were converging on him now, swooping down like metallic harbingers of death. But Klaus wasn't afraid. He had faced worse odds before and survived, because that's what humans did. They survived. With judgment in hand and fire in his veins, General Klaus braced himself for another round, because this war wasn't over yet. And neither was he. The battlefield had become a crucible of fire and fury, and yet the war was far from over. General Klaus crouched behind the jagged remains of his ridge, his sniper rifle judgment still warm in his hands. The air stank of ozone and burning metal, and the twin moons of Sadala cast their pale light over a world that seemed to be dying. But Klaus knew better. Sadala wasn't dying, it was fighting, and so was humanity. The Death Worlders were relentless, their forces seemingly endless. The drones had been dealt with, their shattered husks littering the battlefield, but now the skies above were filled with another threat. Their smaller ships. These were nimble fighters, each one bristling with weapons that could vaporize a human soldier in an instant. They streaked across the heavens like dark comets, raining destruction down on Klaus's troops. But humanity had a plan, and it was as audacious as it was desperate. Klaus activated his comm link, his voice cutting through the static and chaos. All units, this is General Klaus. Phase 2 begins now. Focus fire on their smaller ships. I want every single one of those bastards out of the sky before we move on to their mothership. A chorus of acknowledgments crackled back at him. The plan was simple in theory, but suicidal in execution. Eliminate every smaller ship in the Death Worlders' fleet, leaving only their massive mothership, the heart of their invasion force. Once isolated, the mothership would be lured into a trap so devastating that it would end this war in one cataclysmic blow. The trap? Humanity's own mothership, the Resolute Dawn, packed to the brim with every ounce of explosive material they could muster. It was a strategy born of desperation, a gambit that left no room for retreat or survival. No one comes home today. Klaus didn't need to say it aloud. Every soldier on Sadala already knew it in their bones. This was a fight to the death, not just for themselves, but for humanity's future. From his vantage point, Klaus could see the coordinated effort unfolding below. Anti-aircraft batteries roared to life, sending streams of plasma and railgun fire into the sky. Human fighter pilots, outnumbered but not outmatched, engaged the enemy ships in daring dogfights, weaving through explosions and debris with reckless courage. Klaus raised judgment again, scanning the skies through its advanced optics. The rifle wasn't designed for anti-air combat, but Klaus had never let something as trivial as design limitations stop him before. He tracked one of the enemy fighters, a sleek black dart that moved like liquid shadow, and fired. The plasma bolt struck its target dead on, punching through its cockpit and igniting its fuel reserves in a spectacular explosion. Klaus didn't pause to admire his shot. He was already lining up another target. Rains, he barked into his comm link. What's your status? On the other end, Captain Rains's voice was strained but determined. We're holding the line, sir. Ground forces are pushing forward, but these bastards aren't giving an inch. They won't, Klaus replied grimly. Not until we make them. He fired again, another enemy fighter, spiraling out of control before crashing into the ground below. Around him, other snipers were following his lead, picking off targets with precision while ground troops focused on keeping the Death Worlders infantry at bay. Despite their efforts, it was clear that humanity was running out of time. The Death Worlders' smaller ships were numerous beyond reckoning, and for every one they destroyed, it seemed 2 more took its place. Klaus knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Command, he said into his comm link, addressing the officers aboard the Resolute Dawn. What's our status on Phase 3? There was a brief pause before a voice responded. General Klaus, all systems are ready aboard the Resolute Dawn. We're standing by for your signal. Klaus nodded to himself. The resolute Dawn, humanity's last great warship, loomed high above Sadala's atmosphere like a silent sentinel. It had been stripped of its crew save for a skeleton team of volunteers, men and women who had chosen to stay behind and ensure its systems operated flawlessly until the end. They were heroes in every sense of the word, and they would not be coming home. Hold position, Klaus ordered. We're not done here yet. He turned his attention back to the battlefield just in time to see one of humanity's fighters collide with an enemy ship in a fiery explosion. A desperate kamikaze maneuver by a pilot who had run out of options but not courage. Klaus felt a pang of sorrow, but pushed it aside. There would be time to mourn later, if there was a later. Focus fire, he shouted into his comlink as he took aim at another enemy fighter. We need those skies clear. The battle dragged on, each second feeling like an eternity as human forces clawed their way toward an impossible victory. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Enemy ships fell one by one until only a handful remained, and then none at all. The skies above Sadala were eerily quiet now, save for the distant hum of humanity's remaining fighters circling like hawks over their prey. Klaus lowered his rifle and activated his comlink once more. Command, he said quietly but firmly, prepare to engage Phase 3. There was no hesitation in the response. Understood, General. Klaus turned his gaze toward the horizon where the Death Worlder's mothership loomed, a colossal behemoth that seemed more mountain than machine. It hovered ominously over Sadala like some ancient god come to pass judgment. No one comes home today, Klaus murmured under his breath as he stared at the monstrosity before him. But if this was humanity's last stand, then they would make damn sure it counted. The sky above Sadala burned with the aftershocks of humanity's gambit. The resolute Dawn, a ship that had once been a symbol of Earth's ambition and hope, was now nothing more than a smoldering memory. It had done its duty, detonating with such ferocity that the Death Worlder's mothership was obliterated in an instant. The explosion had been blinding, a second sun that turned night into day and cast long shadows across the battlefield. When the light faded, all that remained of the alien behemoth was a rain of molten debris and the distant echoes of its destruction. But there was no time to celebrate. The Death Worlders were still here. Their mothership might have been their heart, but their soldiers were their fists, and they were still clenched tightly around Sadala. The alien infantry surged across the battlefield, their obsidian forms moving with an unnatural grace despite their towering size. They were enraged now, their silence broken by guttural roars that reverberated across the plains. They had lost their command structure, but they fought on with primal fury, driven by instinct or perhaps vengeance. General Klaus stood at the forefront of humanity's battered forces, his armor scorched and his face streaked with grime. He watched as the Death Worlders regrouped, their massive forms blotting out the horizon like a living storm. These weren't just soldiers, they were juggernauts, each one a living weapon capable of tearing through human lines like paper. Klaus tightened his grip on judgment, his sniper rifle humming faintly in response. The war had changed now. With no ships left in the sky and no mothership looming above, it was back to basics. Man against monster, flesh against steel. This was war as it had been in the old days. Brutal, personal, and unforgiving. He activated his comlink, his voice cutting through the static and chaos. All units, listen up. Their chain of command is gone. Their ships are gone. But these bastards are still coming. That means we dig in, we fight hard, and we don't stop until every last one of them is dead. No retreat. No surrender. A ragged cheer rose from the human ranks, a sound born not of hope but of defiance. These men and women knew what they were up against. They knew the odds were still stacked against them, but they also knew what it meant to be human, to fight even when victory seemed impossible. Klaus raised judgment to his shoulder and scanned the battlefield through its scope. His target was clear, the largest of the Death Worlders, a towering brute clad in armor that seemed to ripple like liquid shadow. It carried a weapon that looked more like an extension of its arm than a separate tool, a massive cannon that glowed with an ominous red light. Priority targets are their heavies. Klaus barked into his comlink as he lined up his shot. Take them down first. The grunts will falter without their big guns. He exhaled slowly and pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt streaked across the battlefield like a comet, striking the giant square in its chest. Its armor absorbed most of the impact, but even it couldn't withstand Judgment's power entirely. The brute staggered backward, its cannon firing wildly into the air as it tried to regain its balance. Klaus didn't give it a chance. He fired again, this time aiming for its exposed neck where its armor was weakest. The second shot hit home, severing something vital. The giant let out a guttural roar before collapsing to its knees and then falling face-first into the dirt with a thunderous crash. Target down, Klaus muttered before shifting his aim to another brute. Around him, human soldiers followed his lead. Rockets streaked through the air, slamming into enemy heavies with devastating force. Snipers picked off targets with precision, while infantry units swarmed smaller Death Worlders in coordinated strikes. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos, and that made all the difference. The Death Worlders fought back with everything they had. Their massive weapons tore through human lines, scattering bodies like leaves in a storm. But for every human who fell, another stepped forward to take their place. They fought not because they believed they could win, but because surrender was not an option. Klaus moved through the battlefield like a phantom, his rifle cutting down enemies from afar, while his plasma saber carved through those who got too close. He targeted leaders first, the largest and most dangerous Death Worlders who rallied their troops with sheer presence alone. One by one, he brought them down until their forces began to falter. But even as the tide began to turn in humanity's favor, Klaus knew this battle was far from over. The Death Worlders were relentless, not just in numbers, but in sheer willpower. Even without leadership or strategy, they fought on with a ferocity that bordered on madness. They didn't retreat, they didn't surrender, they didn't break. Neither did humanity. Hours passed like minutes as the battle raged on under Sadala's twin moons. The ground was slick with blood, human and alien alike, and littered with the wreckage of war machines and fallen warriors. The air was thick with smoke and ash, making it hard to breathe or see more than a few feet ahead. But Klaus pressed on. He led from the front, not because he sought glory, but because he knew his soldiers needed to see him there among them, fighting, bleeding, surviving. He became a symbol, not just of leadership, but of humanity itself, stubborn, unyielding, indomitable. By dawn's first light, if dawn could even be called such on this scarred world, the battlefield was eerily quiet once more. The Death Worlders were gone, not just defeated but annihilated, and humanity stood victorious amidst ruins that told stories of sacrifice and resilience. Klaus lowered judgment at last and surveyed what remained of his forces. Tired faces streaked with dirt and blood, eyes filled with both sorrow for those lost and pride for what had been won. No one comes home today, he had said before this battle began, and he had been right. Sadala wasn't home. Not yet, but now it could be again. And for Klaus, for humanity, that was enough reason to fight another day if need be, though he hoped this war would be their last on this cursed soil. The battlefield was silent now, save for the crackle of fires and the distant groans of the wounded. The Death Worlders were no more, their endless tide broken by humanity's unyielding will and the catastrophic destruction of their mothership. The skies above Sadala were clear, no longer choked with enemy ships or the looming shadow of alien dominance. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was peace, or at least the fleeting semblance of it. General Klaus stood amidst the wreckage, his armor battered and his body aching from countless wounds. Around him, his soldiers began to regroup, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also with the quiet satisfaction of survival. They had done the impossible. They had won. But now came the question that none of them had dared to consider until this moment. How would they get home? The Resolute Dawn, humanity's last great warship, was gone. A fiery sacrifice that had turned the tide of battle, but left them stranded on this desolate world. Their dropships were either destroyed or too damaged to make the journey back to orbit. The remaining human forces were scattered across Sadala's surface, isolated from one another and from any hope of immediate rescue. Klaus surveyed the scene with a grim expression. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. They couldn't stay here indefinitely. Sadala was a hostile world, its environment as unforgiving as its former invaders. Food and medical supplies were already running low, and morale, though bolstered by their victory, would not hold forever. He activated his comm link, addressing what remained of his command staff. All units, this is General Klaus. Begin recovery operations immediately. Gather what supplies you can from the battlefield, medical kits, rations, anything that can be salvaged. Priority is on locating functional vehicles and communications equipment. A chorus of acknowledgments crackled back through the static. The soldiers moved with purpose now, scouring the wreckage for anything that could aid their survival. Klaus joined them, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of hope or danger. Hours passed as they worked tirelessly under Sadala's twin suns. They found scraps of alien technology amidst the debris. Pieces of death whirled a machinery that still hummed faintly with energy. Klaus ordered these gathered and brought to a makeshift command post where human engineers began examining them with feverish intensity. "Can we use any of this to get off-worlds?" Klaus asked one of the engineers, a wiry man named Carter whose hands were blackened with soot. Carter hesitated before answering. "Maybe," he said finally. "Their tech is, well, it's like nothing we've ever seen before. But if we can figure out how it works, we might be able to rig something together. Maybe even a signal booster to call for help." "Do it," Klaus said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." As the engineers worked, Klaus turned his attention to another pressing matter, consolidating their forces. He dispatched runners and scouts to locate scattered units and bring them back to the central encampment. It was slow going. Sadala's terrain was treacherous, its landscape riddled with jagged cliffs and dense forests teeming with hostile wildlife. But humanity had faced worse odds before. Days turned into weeks as they struggled to survive on this alien world. They hunted local fauna for food, purified water from contaminated streams, and patched up their wounded as best they could with limited resources. Every night, they gathered around makeshift campfires and shared stories of Earth, of home, of loved ones waiting for them somewhere out there among the stars. Klaus rarely joined these gatherings. He spent most nights poring over maps and schematics or standing watch on the perimeter with judgment in hand. He knew his soldiers needed him to be strong, to be a symbol of hope even when he felt none himself. Then came the breakthrough. One evening, Carter burst into Klaus's tent with a wide grin on his soot-streaked face. "We've done it," he exclaimed breathlessly. Klaus raised an eyebrow. "Done what?" "We figured out how to use their tech," Carter said excitedly. "It's not much, but we've managed to rig up a transmitter using parts from their drones and fighters. It's crude as hell, but it should be able to send a distress signal." Klaus felt a flicker of hope stir within him for the first time in weeks. "How long until it's operational?" "Already is," Carter replied proudly. Without wasting another moment, Klaus followed Carter to the makeshift transmitter, a towering contraption cobbled together from alien metal and human ingenuity. The engineers had worked miracles. Despite its haphazard appearance, it hummed with power and emitted a faint blue glow. Klaus stepped forward and activated the device. His voice was steady as he spoke into the transmitter. "This is General Klaus of the United Earth Forces calling any allied ships within range. We are stranded on Sadala following engagement with hostile forces. Requesting immediate extraction." The message repeated on a loop as they waited in tense silence. Hours passed without response, but then came a crackle of static followed by a voice. "This is UEF Vessel Endeavor. We've received your signal and are en route to your location." Cheers erupted from those gathered around the transmitter, but Klaus remained calm. "Understood," he replied into the device. "We'll hold position until you arrive." Relief washed over him like a wave. But he knew better than to let his guard down entirely. There was still work to be done. They needed to prepare for extraction and ensure every soldier made it off this cursed planet alive. As dawn broke over Sadala once more, the light casting long shadows across its scarred surface, Klaus allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply and take in what they had accomplished. Humanity had faced annihilation and won. Now it was time to go home, or at least find whatever awaited them beyond this war-torn world. Because if there was one thing Klaus knew for certain, it was that humanity would endure anything so long as they stood together as one people under one unbreakable banner: survival at all costs. The fires of Sadala still smoldered, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape. The human forces, battered but victorious, stood amidst the wreckage of war. Their triumph over the Death Worlders had been absolute, but it had come at a cost. They were stranded on this hostile world, with no ships left to carry them home. Supplies were dwindling, and the harsh environment of Sadala offered little reprieve. Yet even in their darkest hour, humanity's indomitable spirit refused to falter. General Klaus stood atop a ridge overlooking the battlefield, his sniper rifle judgment slung across his back. His face was grim as he surveyed his troops below, survivors of an impossible war. They were organizing what they could, salvaging alien technology, rationing supplies, and tending to the wounded. But Klaus knew the truth. They couldn't last here much longer. It was then that the sky began to change. A low hum reverberated across the plains, growing steadily louder until it became a deafening roar. Soldiers turned their eyes upward, shielding their faces from the glare of twin suns as something massive descended from orbit. At first, they feared it was another enemy, a final strike from some hidden Death Worlder fleet, but then they saw the unmistakable gleam of human engineering. A fleet of ships pierced through Sadala's atmosphere like celestial saviors. Their hulls shimmered with advanced alloys, and their engines burned with a brilliance that seemed almost otherworldly. At their forefront was a colossal vessel unlike anything humanity had ever seen before, a ship so vast it dwarfed even Earth's greatest space stations. Its sleek design bore the unmistakable mark of one man, Elon Musk. The name Eternal Horizon was emblazoned across its hull in bold letters. As the fleet descended, a voice crackled through every comm link on Sadala, a voice that was calm, measured, and imbued with an almost omniscient authority. "This is Elon Musk," it said simply. "I've come to bring you home." The soldiers erupted into cheers, their despair melting away in an instant. Klaus allowed himself a rare smile, but quickly composed himself. He activated his comm link and addressed his troops. "Hold your positions," he barked. "Let's make sure this isn't some trick before we start celebrating." But deep down, Klaus already knew it wasn't a trick. He had heard the stories, whispers of Musk's immortality and his near-omniscient awareness of events across the cosmos. Decades ago, Musk had transcended the limits of mortality through advancements in Neuralink technology. By uploading his consciousness into an artificial neural network and integrating it with cutting-edge quantum computing systems, he had achieved what many believed to be impossible: digital immortality. Now, Musk was more than just a man. He was a living repository of knowledge and innovation, an entity that existed simultaneously across countless systems and networks throughout the universe. Some called him humanity's savior. Others called him its greatest enigma. The Eternal Horizon touched down with a precision that belied its immense size. Smaller ships broke off from its hull like petals from a flower, descending gracefully onto the battlefield below. Soldiers watched in awe as ramps extended and figures emerged. Human figures clad in sleek exosuits that glowed faintly with energy. One of them stepped forward, a tall man whose face was instantly recognizable even after all these years. Elon Musk himself stood before them, his features unchanged by time, but his presence somehow larger than life. "General Klaus," Musk said as he approached. His voice carried effortlessly over the din of activity around them. "You done well?" Klaus saluted instinctively before lowering his hand and meeting Musk's gaze directly. "We did what we had to," he replied simply. Musk nodded approvingly. And now it's time for you all to return home. How? Klaus asked bluntly. We've got no ships left, no way off this rock. Musk gestured toward the eternal horizon. You do now. Klaus hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. What's the catch? Musk smiled faintly, a smile that hinted at secrets too vast for any mortal mind to comprehend. No catch, he said. Humanity has earned this victory, and I intend to ensure it doesn't go to waste. As Musk spoke, his engineers began deploying advanced medical pods and supply crates from their ships. Technology far beyond anything Klaus had ever seen before. Wounded soldiers were carried into pods that healed injuries within minutes. Starving troops were handed nutrient packs that revitalized them almost instantly. Within hours, the human forces on Sadala were transformed from a ragged band of survivors into a rejuvenated army ready for transport. Klaus watched as his troops boarded the smaller ships that would ferry them up to the eternal horizon. He felt an odd mixture of relief and unease. Relief at finally leaving this cursed world behind, but unease at what lay ahead under Musk's watchful eye. As he prepared to board himself, Musk placed a hand on his shoulder. You've done more than just survive here, Musk said quietly. You've proven what humanity is capable of when pushed to its limits. Klaus met his gaze once more. And what about you? He asked pointedly. Why are you doing this? Musk's expression grew distant, almost wistful, as if he were gazing into some far-off horizon only he could see. Because I believe in humanity, he said finally. And because there are greater battles yet to come. With that cryptic remark lingering in his mind, Klaus boarded one of the shuttles bound for orbit. As Sadala faded into the distance below him, an Earth loomed ahead like a beacon of hope on the ship's navigation screens. Klaus couldn't shake Musk's words from his thoughts. What greater battles awaited them? And what role would Musk play in shaping humanity's future? For now, those questions would have to wait. For today belonged not to uncertainty, but to victory and to homecoming at last.